there. And when the job was, let's just say, not quite as I expected it to be. And the company was actually close to bankruptcy. And the honest truth is I was very overwhelmed at that point. I had no idea how to turn it around, and I knew nobody in Dubai. So I was brand new. And I met a business coach at that time, and she was asking me about my leadership style. And at the time, I was talking about intuition and being an intuitive leader. And she stopped me and she asked me a question that probably changed my life, because she asked me, Mimi, is it intuition or is it empathy? And I remember thinking, no, it's not empathy. You know, what's empathy got to do with the workplace? But I left that meeting. I discovered something called the empathy deficit, which I'll share with you all tonight. Fundamentally, that led me to write my first book, which, as you said, Vanta, is called Softening the Edge. A couple of years later, I published a second, which is called Empathy at Work. And I think that my publisher, Sohin, is here with us tonight, published out of Mumbai in India, for India. And my third book is called The Connection Prescription, and it comes out in April. So that is the journey. Thank you, ladies. That's the journey in a nutshell. But let me tell you a little bit more about empathy and answer the question that you asked there as well around, you know, is this a soft skill? Which, by the way, it's not. It will make you strong and not weak. But let me tell you why. So tonight, I'm really going to give you a bit of a quick masterclass. And bear in mind, sometimes this takes me 2 days. So this really is the icing right on the top, but hopefully for everyone that's here, it will give you some inspiration as to what this really is and why we need it more now than ever in our workplaces. So the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, that we have a really big problem out there in the world. It's an $8.8 trillion problem. And that $8.8 trillion is equal to round about nearly 9% of global GDP. So this is a huge, huge part of our global economy. And it represents the predicted or estimated loss in productivity due to 3 key areas: disengagement, presenteeism, and disconnection. Now, presenteeism talks to the reality when people are turning up at 9, and they're going home at 5. They're doing their jobs. They're following their job descriptions. You can't fire them, but that's all they're doing, right? There's nothing more than that. There's no real engagement, innovation, creativity, relationship building. They're just doing the day-to-day. Disengagement, I'm sure, is a term that many of you are very aware of. We're going to talk about it quite a lot tonight, which is fundamentally being disengaged from your work, not interested in your work, not finding the passion in your work. And then disconnection comes back to belonging in that workplace. So I don't feel connected to the workplace I'm in, or the people I'm working with, or the culture that I'm sitting within. And of course, we'll see tonight, but belonging, that last one, connection, is critical to us as human beings. We are a pro-social species. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we're talking about tonight, yes, it's about the workplace, of course, but it's actually about our shared human survival. So these skill sets are about the human race and staying on the planet, and not just doing well at work and in the workplace. So let's look at a little bit of the data, and I promise it gets more positive from here on out, right? But the data, 86% of people around the world today are already disengaged. So if you think about that for a moment in your own team, imagine for a minute your team, it doesn't matter, small team, big team, startup, corporate, it could even be some group of people you work with in your community. And then imagine if 86% of them are not really doing anything other than turning up. Imagine the cost of that. Imagine the resource that you're wasting when people are not engaged in their work. And of course, we know that disengagement leads to lower productivity, lower quality of work, higher attrition, right? Less ROI on the people, return on investment on the people that you have, because they're disengaged with what they're doing. On top of that, 55% of people are planning to resign. So that's half of the webinar tonight, half of all of us. But again, imagine in your team, if half of them disappeared, right? Half of them walked out. Imagine that time, right? To replace them, to retrain, the cost of that. And then think about that on a global scale, 55% of people that no longer want to be in the role that they're in. In the USA, 40% of the workforce has already gone, right? This is the corporate workforce. 40% of the professionals in the US corporate economy have already left to go and find a side hustle, to set up something new. Imagine the brain drain, right? No wonder it's costing us nearly 9% of global GDP, and that's just in one country. But why I really get up every day, why I get on a plane. Any of you that are following me on social will know that I spend more time on a plane than on the ground, is because of this. Half of us, more than half of us, are lonely. Now, when you understand that loneliness, it's not about being apart from people, right? We are all surrounded by people all the time. Tonight, we're all with people, right? You can be lonely, but not alone. Loneliness is a lack of connectivity. It's a lack of being connected, belonging to the people that you spend your time with, live with, your community, or where you work. And of course, for those of us that work for a living, we're, in employment 5/7 of the week, approximately 92,000 hours in your life is spent in the workplace. Now, I mentioned just now that we are a pro-social species. So to be isolated, to be lonely is not only bad for our businesses and our careers, but it's incredibly bad for our health, right? So lonely people are statistically likely to die 8 years earlier than a non-lonely person. And according to the Surgeon General in the USA, loneliness is as dangerous to our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So loneliness is far wider reaching than, for example, the COVID pandemic ever touched, right? The highest burden to our healthcare systems worldwide is not cancer, diabetes, heart disease. It's loneliness. So our loneliness is quite literally killing us. Now, why? Why all of these problems? Disconnection, disengagement, loneliness, demotivation. We have a mental health crisis, right? On the planet today, there are 330 million people that don't have a single friend, and nearly 400 million people suffering with anxiety or depression. 400 million people. Why? For me, a lot of this, not all of it, but nearly all of it can be linked very directly back to the empathy deficit that I mentioned I discovered in the introduction. Now, the empathy deficit was a term that was coined by President Obama well before he was president of the United States in 2006. So he addressed his audience and he said to them that day, I know I'm supposed to be talking about my federal deficit, but I think we should be talking about our empathy deficit. The empathy deficit is fundamentally a lack of connectivity in the world, an inability to understand those that we share our communities, lives, and workplaces with. He said this in 2006. Us humans, being humans, have done very little about it for 20 years. And I would argue that if you look at the US economy, but in fact, the global economy today, we are seeing exactly what he predicted, right? He said, I think we should be talking about this. It's going to impact our GDP. It's going to impact our economies and our societies. And all you need to do is turn on the news today to know that he was indeed very right. So how big is this problem? Really, how worried should we be about this disconnection around the world? Well, it's been declining for 30 years. And when you understand, as I just said earlier, that we are a pro-social species, and this is the ability to understand each other, to connect, and you see that for 3 decades, it's been declining, and we have now lost nearly 50% of a skill set that keeps us alive as a species, you realize why I get up every day to do this work, right? Why the empathy deficit is such a huge problem for our workplaces and our world. So a little bit of news to give some context. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has now come out and declared this a global public health concern. As I said earlier, this is costing our healthcare systems hundreds of millions of dollars. And what this means is that governments that subscribe to the data of the WHO, which is around 70% of the governments worldwide, should action on this. And we're seeing some governments do so. So the UK, Denmark, United Arab Emirates, Japan, now all have positions in parliament or within their political structures to address loneliness, to reconnect their communities. In fact, in the UAE, in Dubai, this year, their government has named the whole of 2025 the Year of Community, which means that the entire country is looking up to this vision to reconnect workplaces and the country at large. Some of you may remember a story from India with one of the big 5 consulting firms that went very viral about 6 months ago. A young woman died of overwork in the workplace, and the story went around the world. And at that time, her mother wrote a letter. And I've put it up on the screen here just to bring a focus on that one sentence that says, from her mum about her daughter who was 24, "My heart aches not just for the loss of my child, but the lack of empathy," right? So today, wherever you look, you're going to find content that connects back to this, because our survival, as well as our success in workplaces, relies on that connection. So the data will show us that you're going to get 23% higher profits in an organization that embodies empathy, 17% higher efficiency, 48% higher levels of engagement, 68% higher levels of innovation, creative thinking, right? So the business data is endless. But as I said earlier, this is about more than that. And because of that, this is now a trending topic all around the world. So you can Google after this webinar, empathy and anything you are interested in, okay? Empathy in tech, empathy in education, empathy in HR, empathy in leadership, empathy in children, empathy and cooking. You will find content. But that shift has happened really in the last 5 years. If I take you back to 2018, when I met with this coach and I understood the empathy deficit for the first time, I could not believe that nobody was talking about it. I felt that there was this huge reality. No one was talking about it, and I had to start writing. I wrote my first book and speaking. Now, at that time, I probably had, I don't know, 400 connections on LinkedIn, maybe. And I just got up every day, guys, every day, Saturday, Sunday, Christmas Day, any day, all days, and would put content out in the world to try and fill the gap, to talk about empathy. And I think at the time, most days, I felt like I was broadcasting to a big black hole and, nobody was reading it, and probably they weren't. But today they are, right? Today I get invited to things like this with Radical Edge and get invited to be part of things because it is a trending topic. Now you're going to see a massive shift. And if you hadn't heard about it yet, you will now. And now you've heard me talk about it, I would put money on the fact that you'll see it everywhere you look. Today, our reach on something like LinkedIn is around 130,000 people a week. And that just goes to show the organic interest in this is changing. The world is changing. So if there's one thing I want you to remember from tonight, if not what empathy is, it will be this, right? Which is the issues I'm talking about are not soft issues, right? We're talking about mental health. We're talking about physical health. We're talking about the reality of our human race. And I didn't touch on it earlier, but we're talking about things like suicide rates. Ladies and gentlemen, the second biggest killer of our youth today is no longer vehicle accidents. It's suicide, right? Our children are killing themselves rather than stay on the planet for us because they feel that we don't understand them, that they feel that they don't belong, that there's no empathy for them and who they want to be and how they want to see the world, right? So these could never be described as soft issues, and therefore they can never be described as soft skills. So right back to your question, Vanita, right at the beginning, is this going to make me weak or soft or gentle? Absolutely not. These are hard skills. They're hard to find, they're hard to master, they're very hard to maintain, but they have hard business results. As I said earlier, 23% higher profit, 17% more efficiency, and I could go on all night with statistics. Anybody who wants them, find me on any platform, LinkedIn and Instagram are my most active. I can give you that data and give you more information there. But fundamentally, what that means is that the fourth revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, which we're in right now, it's not just about the tech, right? It's about the people. We love to talk about AI, and so we should, right? It's a big thing. But fundamentally, it is the people that we lead right now that we need to shift, right? How we lead them, who we're leading, this idea, you can see there the words of a multi-generational organization, right? For the first time in history, we have 4 generations in every workplace. And that is particularly dominant in the regions we're in, right? In Asia, particularly in South Asia, where we see lots of family businesses. You might see, for example, the chair, normally man, but chairman or woman at the top, could be in their 70s or 80s. I worked with a tea company last year. The chairman was 92 and still in the office. Granted, not doing a huge amount, but his influence was there at 90 years old, right? And then at the bottom, you have Gen Z, right? You have the 17-year-olds, and we could talk about that all night. We won't. But the fundamental reality is we have to shift, not just who we're leading, but how we're leading them, how we understand those different generations. So empathy itself, this is from Satya Nadella. He is the CEO of Microsoft, often awarded as the most successful CEO in the world. And he says this. He says, most people think that empathy is something you reserve for your friends or your family, but you're wrong, because empathy is actually an existential business priority. When he came on board in Microsoft, he came into a time when Samsung and Apple were stealing the pie, right? And he had to really significantly shift. He did so. He returned $6 trillion to his shareholders, so he did pretty well. And it wasn't just about his people. It was about the process that they innovated with, the way that they incentivized, the way that they created new product development, all fused on this idea of empathy and understanding consumers, customers, stakeholders, and of course, their staff. So what is it? Okay, so instead of me explaining to you, I'm going to play a quick clip here. This is from the Joker movie, one of the highest grossing films in their category last year, over $1 billion in sales. If there's any problem with the sound, do let me know. But otherwise, have a listen to this.
Have you seen what it's like out there, Murray? Do you ever actually leave the studio? Everybody just yells and screams at each other. Nobody's civil anymore. Nobody thinks what it's like to be the other guy.
Nobody thinks what it's like to be the other guy. That's it. Fundamentally, when we talk about empathy, we are talking about perspective taking. That's it. The ability to understand how someone else thinks or how they see the same environment that you're in, how their experience differs, why that team member of yours is doing less well after their promotion, why another team member is always late and blames it on the traffic, but they say the same thing every day. It's not the traffic, right? What's really going on? Why your supplier of 20 years suddenly doesn't want to work with you anymore? Why somebody in your board meeting looks so clearly angry? That's empathy, perspective taking, understanding other people. It is not an emotion. It is a skill set. It is built into your prefrontal cortex. This is proven by neuroscience. You are born with this. It is a skill set that we have in order to protect the human race, as I said earlier, right? So as a skill set, this is something you can choose to use. So I often get asked, but Mimi, maybe you just have more empathy than everybody else. That's not the case. You, me, your husband, your wife, your sister, brother, daughter, children, everyone, your boss, we all have the same amount of empathy, but how we use it differs. So I've touched on many of the benefits of empathy in the workplace, of relationships, of feeling like you belong, but there's 5 key ones on here. So connecting multiple generations, understanding why the older generation really believe in phone calls. It's important to them, right? Equally, for the younger generation, being able to send a message on WhatsApp or a message on Instagram, even to a client, that's normal to them, right? So understanding the whys and the hows, why a job title that's totally fine for somebody in their 40s doesn't understand why I'd need to change that. But somebody in their 20s is like, oh, no way, I don't want to be called that, right? Understanding. It's human data so that you can work together better. It allows your people to be cared for, right? So to balance your people in your workplace and make sure that you're a fantastic place to work with their performance and growth. not only because people that feel understood and seen perform and grow better, but because you can balance the two. So I often talk about balancing humanism with capitalism. Engagement, motivation, loyalty, tenure, attrition, all impacted positively by higher levels of empathy. You're going to see lower levels of attrition, lower levels of sick days in the workplace. You're going to see, as I said earlier, up to 48% higher levels of engagement and loyalty. We also know that from a net promoter score, people often see up to 10% point differences in their customers when the internal culture is more empathetic. That is because people feel able to make decisions. There's more psychological safety. They're able to take more risks with their clients. So you see the impact on the external customer as well. Well-being and inclusion, I could talk all day, right? But fundamentally, all I will say is this: you cannot create inclusion without first creating empathy. It's impossible, guys. How can you ever include someone if you don't understand how they want to be included? Right? I say often about female leaders, right? As anyone on the call that's a female leader, we are constantly told, right, that we should want a seat at the table. Number one, does anyone know where the table is, right? Where is this table that we're all supposed to want to sit at? But number two, did anyone ask us whether we want a seat at the table? Because I work with women all around the world every week, and I can tell you that 70, 80% of them don't want a seat at the table. They want to be powerful. They want to be the senior vice president. They want salary and growth and fame, maybe. They don't necessarily want to spend their evenings sitting around a boardroom table. They have other areas of their life, right? So wherever you're looking at inclusion, ask yourself this: how can I include anyone if I don't first understand them? And then the final point there, back to AI, just is that the alignment, and we have to bring AI in, right? But the alignment of AI into our HR processes, into our businesses, can only be consistent and sustained if we balance it with empathy, so that we're building humanity into those systems. And I greatly believe in the power of AI. I do not think it's going to steal our humanity. I think it can empathize, and quite frankly, it should. Because as I've pointed out to you already, we are very bad at it, right? The human race, the workplace of today, is failing at empathy. So if AI can help us fix it, then as far as I'm concerned, you know, we should embrace exactly that. It comes down to this: you cannot lead if you don't first listen. If you Google leadership, right, you're going to get, I don't know, 10 million entries on what leadership is. But for me, this is incredibly simple, and it's in the name, it's in the word itself. To lead other people, somebody has to be following, right? I can't lead if there's nobody there. You can only lead if people are following, and people follow those that listen to them. Think about it in your career. Think of your best ever boss, and Friday night they say to you, "Hey, Mimi, could you just stay a little bit late and help me with this PowerPoint deck? I really need to get it finished." You're like, "Of course, no problem," right? Then think about a leader or a teammate who never listens to you, doesn't care about your opinion, doesn't make you feel included, definitely doesn't value you. When they ask the same question, you're like, "Sorry, I've got to walk my dog." You're not in at all. So to lead, you have to listen to people, because fundamentally what we know is that when people feel heard, they follow those leaders, they stick with them. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. So very quickly, 3 listening-led leadership secrets that I can share with you so that you can practice some of these things literally tonight with your family, with your husband, wife, children, and bring that to life. And then, of course, take it into the workplace as well. So my first secret is to prove your curiosity, right? If you want to listen better to people, you need to be curious, right? You need to ask questions. You need to be interested in them. Otherwise, you're never going to understand them, right? You have to ask things in order to be able to understand. So here's a couple of my favorite questions for doing that. What do you think? So simple, right? This works in any language. Doesn't matter. English, Hindi, any Mandarin, German, it doesn't matter. Whatever language you're speaking, right? Asking people, well, what do you think? Help me understand, or can you help me understand? Help me understand, how did you get to this conclusion? Why is your thinking like this? Can you help me see your thought pattern here? Why is it you wanted to talk to me about that, right? Using those questions to really open up conversation. And as a side note, because I talk a lot about family, if one of your teenagers or children says, well, I don't know, right? And they're being petulant. Next time, try this. When someone says to you, I don't know, say to them, okay, if you did know, what would you do? And see what happens. It's an amazing tip from neuroscience. The minute you ask someone, okay, no problem, but if you did know, what do you think you'd say? Immediately they go, oh, well, and then they give you an answer, right? So that's a little side tip, but it's a really good one. The second step here that I want to share with you is to choose your words wisely. Again, it doesn't matter what language we're speaking, but choosing how you ask questions and how you engage with people. So my favorite one of these is to shift from the word why to the word how. Now, why is a good question. I've just asked you to ask more questions. Why do you think that? Why are you going there? Why did you make that decision? It's a good word. However, it's also a word that is on the offensive, the attack, right? Why? Why are profits down? Why are you late? Why were you in traffic? Why didn't you hire? Why did you fire? Why were you, right? So the challenge with the word why is it puts us on the back foot. It makes us defensive. And people go, well, right? Many answers, right? It makes people anxious. When you use the word how, you can ask the same question, get to the same endpoint without that offensive kind of attack. So you can see here, for example, instead of saying, why did you do that? You can say, how do you think that happened, right? Or why don't you just talk to the team? How do you feel about having a conversation with the team, right? Immediately, even when I do it, you can see the difference, right? So shifting from why to how is worthwhile the thought it takes you to do it, to reframe the question and see how much more understanding, data, insight, empathy you will have for your team, your boss, your stakeholder, your customer, your CEO when you do that. The third tip is to leverage neurolinguistics. Now, in a short webinar like this, I can't touch much on the neuroscience, but this is a huge part of what I teach. And I keep it incredibly simple so I can teach to you, to your teams. You can reach out to me and I'll share that with you. But fundamentally, neurolinguistics is language that we know talks to the subconscious mind. So my favorite phrase for this is this one. What is stopping you? Again, next time someone comes to you and says, for example, Mimi, I know I said I would do that financial review for you by today. It's not going to be ready. My instinct is to say, well, why? Why is it not going to be ready, right? Again, as I said, on the offensive, and you're going to get an autopilot response. Oh, well, the cat ate my homework and I didn't do this and the CFO didn't give me the numbers and whatever, right? When you say to someone, okay, what's stopping you? Something amazing will happen. You will see their eyes move slightly up or slightly down. It depends on their neuroprocessing, but they are accessing their subconscious mind. And then you'll see them pause and they'll look up and they'll go, oh, well, what's stopping me is, and they'll give you an answer. It will be insightful and deep and powerful. It will allow you to empathize, to take the perspective on why this person is not going to deliver what they said that they would. So neuroscience, neurolinguistics is a huge, powerful force in the workplace, and it doesn't have to be super complicated. It can be really simple, like changing your language or the way you engage with people. And then just as a little bit of bonus content, because I love you all, this one's called the confirm and correct methodology. Super, super powerful in meetings. All it allows you or asks of you to do is when someone is talking and you're able to empathize, they're sharing, they're giving you insight into their opinion or how they got to this conclusion. When they finish, repeat back to them just the last few 10, 15 words or so and say, okay, thank you, Mimi. What I heard you say was you're extremely frustrated with this and you don't think we're going to make the deadline. Mimi can either say, yes, that's exactly what I said. She's confirming you and I have understood each other. Or she could say, no, I didn't say I was very frustrated. I said I was disappointed, right? I can correct what the person said. So what it does is it allows the speaker to feel heard, to feel listened to feel empathy. And it allows the listener to ensure that what you think you heard is what they meant, right? Because often in the workplace, up to 68% of our conversations are misunderstandings. So it allows you to ensure that you don't have that happen in your team. So what have I said tonight? This is what I've said. that fundamentally, whatever your performance drivers are in the workplace this year, engagement, performance, growth, more connectivity, cultural shift, transition, transformation, whatever it is you want to do, it's going to be embedded in relationships because, you know, AI world or not, people run businesses, people work with people. Your relationships can only be made deeper, more sustainable, more effective through empathy because it's the data. So if you came into this webinar thinking it was a soft thing, I hope I've convinced you it's not. The people that use empathy, the FBI in hostage negotiations, the army in war zones, right? The toughest of human environments are using empathy as the skill set to navigate and manage and elevate relationships in order to improve outcomes. And obviously for me, the way we do that is through listening-led leadership, being a leader that listens more than they speak, that invests in understanding others. And when you speak to the top headhunters in the top 5 cities in the world today, empathy is in the top 4 hireable skill sets for CEOs. It's not always called empathy. It might be called good listening, communication skills, human skills. People frame it differently. But what they're talking about is this. So today, if you want to be promoted or you want to be hired, you need to be able to understand and communicate with people. So empathy is a data set. It's also a sales set. It's going to enable you to build your business, your pipeline, and your relationships. And fundamentally, the question for yourself is that, right? How much of it will you embrace and use in your work? The last thing I'd say is this, which is, are you listening to your team, to your people, quite frankly, to your children? Thank you very much for listening to me. And this QR code here has a whole lot of gifts on there for you guys, right? There are some ebooks. There is a self-empathy. I didn't talk about that tonight, but a self-empathy journal for everyone going through transition or looking to change their jobs this year. There is also an audit on there, so you can test your levels of empathy, how empathetic you are as a leader. And of course, all of my socials. So please do come and join me on Instagram or LinkedIn. My vision is to create more empathy in the world, and I can only do that with all of you joining me on the journey. So the QR code is still on the screen, but really the rest of this hour is about dialogue, is about you having the opportunity to talk amongst yourselves and to me. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for your attention and for inviting me to share something I'm so passionate about.
Mimi, thank you very much. But we want you to just keep the slide a bit so that people can take the gift that you're offering. And I'm sure they have been listening because I do have questions in the chat box and I am also scanning. So yeah, so maybe a few seconds.
Yep, we leave that up there so everyone can grab it. You can also see my website there, empathyeverywhere.co. And my book that you saw at the beginning that Vanta held up, Empathy at Work, is available only in India, on Amazon across India and in various stores as well. So Empathy at Work is available if you want to go and take a look at that as well.
Okay. We have the link. So, and even in case you have missed what Mimi shared, I'm just going to summarize before we start asking questions. So firstly, Mimi started the webinar with giving us some fantastic data, which honestly, some of the numbers blew me off. And I'm not surprised that I think the most deadliest disease in the world today is loneliness. And I think it doesn't even have a cure until you and I do something about it, right? So beautiful. I think I loved what you said about that. And then Mimi moved to talk about the workplace statistics. And very scary to know that 40% of the workforce in the USA has already left. And with all the changes that's happening with the new government, I think it's a very scary situation out there. So something that we might want to look into our own organizations a little more closer, maybe a little more micromanaging to see what's happening. And then we moved on to Mimi's understanding what made her actually get into this empathy space. And she had this very beautiful personal story of herself. whether is it intuitive thinking or was it empathy? And that's where her journey started. So thank you so much for sharing that, Mimi. That's beautiful. And that also, brings us to understanding. And I have a question, of course, for you. And then we also have some people just joined in 5 minutes back. So I'm just summarizing the 3 tips that you gave all of us so that they don't miss it out. And I think it'll be lovely if you can just give us that 1, 2, 3 tips. Than me summarizing it. I'm sure they would love to listen from you. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely can. So, and anyone who missed the slides, or actually anybody who just would like the slides, I believe in open source. So I will share everything. I never hide anything. I never pretend you can't have my content. So if you want the slides or you missed the slides, just drop me a message. I put my email there in the chat box, or find me on social media. You can have them. But the 3 final steps that I spoke about to really prove empathy, the first was to use your curiosity. So to really use open-ended questions, things like, what do you think? Help me understand, right? So questions that allow you to really build inquiry. The second one I spoke about was choosing your words wisely. And again, it doesn't matter what language that's in. And the tip I gave was to use the word how instead of the word why, to really create openness and engagement and conversation. So for example, instead of saying, why did you do that? Saying, how do you think that happened, right? Or why don't you just talk to that person? Saying, how do you feel about talking to that person? So using the power of the word how. And then the last tip I gave was around neurolinguistics, and my favorite sentence, which is what is stopping you, which is a sentence you can use with talent teams, even your children, to really access the subconscious. So when you ask someone, okay, but what's stopping you from doing that? You will see them move their eyes and access the subconscious mind and really give you a far deeper, more insightful response, which of course allows you to empathize, which I clarified today is simply perspective taking. So we are talking about a skill set which is built into the prefrontal cortex of your brain and never an emotion.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. And I'm sure people who just joined us now got a good summary of the tips. And in fact, you re-emphasized on those 3 to take back. Thank you very much, Mimi. So I'm just going to start with some questions I penned down for you after reading your book. And I just loved your book. Like I said, I genuinely feel it's awesome. And for everyone in the room, you've got to really pick up this book of hers, which is available on Amazon, called Empathy at Work. And one of the questions I ask you, Mimi, is because you've been working with so many corporate companies as well as leaders across the world. In your experience, what is the biggest misconception about empathy at work?
Oh, well, without a doubt, I know exactly what that is, which is, and you said it, Vanessa, you said it at the very beginning, which is that people don't understand what empathy is. They confuse it with sympathy. They confuse it with compassion. And they think it makes them soft, right? They think it's a soft skill that makes them weak, particularly in our region. And by our region, I'm really talking about South Asia. So Sri Lanka, India, this part of the world, right? I see that Q&A in that question in the Q&A all the time. But I hope what I've kind of spoken to today is the fact that this is really a power skill, right? There is nothing soft about this. It is the ability to engage, to communicate, to efficiently build relationships. But that's why I do this work really, Vanessa, is that every day I try to get out there and meet other businesses and explain, what this skill set is, why the FBI uses it, why armies across the world use it. And earlier today, I was really proud, actually, that the session I did before this was with the government of South Africa. And I'm proud because anytime I get to work with the government, I feel we're making momentum, right? Beyond just the corporate world. Hopefully, we're going to create impact on a national level for some of these countries. And I had the most amazing feedback, which I want to share with you, because a young woman, she was a senior leader, but a young senior leader, told me a little story at the end. And she said, Mimi, people have told me for my whole career that I'm too soft. I use emotion too much to ever be a leader. But I realized today, listening to you, that actually my empathy is what makes me a leader. And what I've summarized from that is that I don't have too much empathy, but the people saying it have too little. And I just thought it was the most brilliant end to my session, right? To unpack exactly what that is. So the biggest problem that we have is ensuring that our leaders have the awareness that this is a super skill to engagement, to profit. I said earlier, 23% higher profit in businesses that embrace this, but people don't know.
Yeah, agreed. And I think there's some interesting conversation going as well in the chat on about conversations. And it's very interesting that some of us assume that many don't want to have the conversations. And an assumption is one of the biggest silent, I would say, virus in our brain. But coming to you, and I also very curious and slightly greedy to know from you, if you could give us very small and maybe everyday action that we can do to build an empathetic workplace.
I think that the core to all empathy sits in listening. And when I do my training courses with corporates and my masterclasses, fundamentally what I'm teaching your teams is listening skills, is how to listen. Because listening's a funny thing. We think we're doing it, right? We tell people to listen all the time, but we don't teach them to listen. And that's why we have so many of our problems. So if I was going to say one simple step to improve your empathy as a leader or in the workplace, it would be as a leader to build your ability to listen. And so often at the end of my workshops, these very senior leaders will come to me and say, Mimi, I just realized I've not listened to anyone ever in my life. Right? Everybody laughs, but they're being serious, right? And within your teams, it would be to create a culture that values listening, right? That has KPIs in place. I always say to my clients, what you measure manifests. If you don't measure it, people won't do it. So I think that the core has to start with this ability to listen.
Beautiful. And I think that's a great tip to see how well we really listen to people around there. Brilliant. So there are some questions for you, which I'm going to take it directly here. There's one question from Ruchi. Ruchi asks, how can we use AI to build empathy? Of course, I did share one that I knew. This was actually done, Ruchi, at one of my clients' place, where they actually created an app which picked up the languages from the emails, the internal emails, which says that this is non-empathetic, statements or words, and this is empathetic. So that is one way of using AI. But I'm again curious to know, Mimi, because we are living in a world where we can't run away, and the future is AI, machine learning, and tech. So how can we then use AI to build empathy at workplaces?
Yeah, look, I touched on this earlier in the webinar as well. People are very afraid of AI. And of course, in every industrial revolution, we have been afraid of technological change. That's who we are as humans. I spoke a little bit tonight about evolution and sort of survival mechanisms in the brain. We fear these big changes because we're trying to stay alive. So it is literally our brain's way of saying, don't admit it, don't accept it, don't have it, you might die, right? So the fear is acceptable fear. But for me, there's many ways in terms of the actual ways people are using it. But what I would really say to Rushi, I think it was, and to everybody else, is that we are failing in our workplaces at creating this. This is why we have a great resignation and silent quitters. It's why we are losing that stat I said at the beginning, $8.8 trillion in lost revenue, because our people are disconnected. Our young people won't stay in the workplace, right? So we have no choice, actually, guys, but to embrace some way to improve this. And if that's through AI, then as far as I'm concerned, that's a good thing. The second thing I would say is that, as I mentioned, empathy is a hard skill, right? To listen, it takes time. It takes energy, it takes focus, it takes intention, and often it takes training, right? So if your workplace isn't very good at it, why would you not embrace a bot to help you, or a machine of some form? So in terms of what I've seen in the market that's doing it really well, I have no association with them. I just like what they do. There's a company in the US called Happy.ai. And they have created an AI interface that companies can buy, where it will even, similarly to what you said there earlier, Vanitha, it will even join your team's rooms and help you analyze what's going on in the room, the behaviors of people in the room, and give you advice on how to engage better. It also profiles staff. So, if we were all one team on the call today, it would say to me, for example, and I'm making this up, but for example, it would say, Meghana is an introvert. She doesn't like confrontation. She will do best if you use this turn and this type of way of negotiating with her. I made all of that up, right? But it will help you engage with your teams more effectively. And as I've said, we are not very good at that. So there are many now ways that AI is intervening. And for me, I'm super happy to be signing a new engagement with a very large training platform, which will help me in my work to be able to scale this, because we know, and hopefully you understood that as well today, Rishi, our world needs this. Our human being, your children need this, right? We have to stop them killing themselves. We have to stop this rot that's going on out there, this disintegration, the segregation, the racism. What we know, by the way, is that when empathy goes down, the isms, sexism, racism, ageism, all of the isms go up. We have to fix it, and none of us can do it alone. So the other thing I would close with is that if AI can help us scale the reach of this, then, I'm all for that, and training materials that get to more people. I hope
Yeah.
that answers the question. Thank you.
All right. I have a question from Rafaq. Rafaq says, how can we make sure empathy in a large organization such as his, which has 13,000 employees? So before Mimi answers that, just hire Mimi and I. We are there to help you with large organizations. So don't hesitate to connect with us to do some master classes or some trainings or coaching your leaders, and also working with your organizations. But that said apart, Mimi, I know that you worked with large organization, and that's a very fair question. When you have a large population which comes to their own mindset and their own perspective taking, how can they bring in the culture of empathy?
Like, I think, sorry, I missed the name of the person who asked the question. Rahaf, right?
Yeah.
Rahaf, thank you for the question. I think that there's 3 stages of this. I think the first is around awareness. So the first thing is you have to create awareness in your organization of the value of this. And that can be through platform systems, webinars, keynotes, end of year events, intranet content, cultural webinars, however you want to do that, right? But you have to do a little bit of what I did tonight, right? You have to bring them on board with why we need this, right? You have to be able to debunk the myth that this is like a soft thing, or it's like being sympathetic, or it's being nice. I always say to my audiences, please be nice, but this is not about being nice, right? So the first step is awareness. The second step has to be around intention. You have to create intentionality around teaching this. As I said earlier, we tell people to listen. We don't teach them to listen. If you want them to change their skill sets, you have to teach them their skill sets, right? So again, it can be webinars, it can be experiential learning, it can be content that you put into your backend in your LMS with modules and engagement there, where they can take those pieces of content. Some of the work I'm working on now will give us the opportunity to create, it's amazing what tech can do, entire meetings like this, simulations of a meeting like this, where your staff, all 13,000 of them, can join on their own time the meeting and engage. And the system will tell them, this was a good thing to say, and how would you address this? And what might you say to Mimi when she says this? So you can use now technology to create those simulations. It's no longer like a multiple choice with like little stick men, like Sarah went to the office, what would you do? Like, no, none of that. So, and then the third thing I would say is accountability. Measurement, fundamentally, as I said earlier, what you measure will manifest. So you want people to listen better and have more empathy, you have to measure them on it. And if it's not clearly built into KPIs, at least built into that accountability structure of what you expect from them. So the 3 stages, just to recap, would be to create the awareness. And with that comes passion, by the way, normally. Then the intention, so the methodology for them to do that. And then, of course, the last bit is that accountability, which is fundamentally measurement.
Beautiful. I think maybe you also, with this question, also answered Joseph asking the same thing in terms of, what are the best ways to promote empathy in an organization to build excellent culture? So Joseph, I think the answer of creating awareness, intention, and accountability would have helped. But in case you think you need more, do let us know. However, I have Natasha's question, which says, uh, where someone is dealing with a lot of conflicting relationships in work and has lost trust, how best can they reconnect through empathy? And she also thanks you for the great work that you've been doing, Mimi.
Oh, thank you. And I love that you're dialing in from Ireland, right? We have all these different countries on the line. So that the question there, Vanessa, just to confirm, was if you've had a lot of conflict and you've lost trust, how do you rebuild it with empathy? Did I understand that right? Yes. Okay. So I do a lot of training actually now in conflict negotiation and management, which if you told me 5 years ago, I would be like, I am never doing that. But then somehow it became me, and now I do teach this as a module. I think there's so much in that question, but the one thing I really want to say is that we fear conflict, and we fear conflict because the word is loaded with negativity, right? Through experience, through generations, through the media predominantly. But actually, conflict is a really good thing, right? Conflict creates innovation. It builds relationships. It builds new relationships. It inspires learning. It creates growth. There's many, many phenomenal things that come from conflicted relationships. So the first thing I would say in any organization is to build a healthy understanding of what conflict is. And Natasha, one of the ways I do that is I ask in my workshops, I will ask the audience to write a definition of conflict without any negative words in it. And it's a really good exercise. So give it a go, because suddenly you realize, oh, actually, it's just like positive tension, right? This is actually a really good thing. So the first thing I would say is reframing how people understand conflict. The second thing I would remind people of is ask them or yourself, who are the 3 most important relationships in your life, right? And most people will say maybe their parents, their husband, their children, right? And then ask yourself, in which of those relationships do you not have conflict, right? In all relationships, there's conflict. That's just who human beings are. So again, reframing that this conflict is not about losing trust. It's just about re-looking how you approach that and how you communicate through it. And of course, I'm cutting a lot of data out because of time. But the third thing I would say is to remember you cannot solve conflict. It's not something to be solved, because conflict is emotional, right? There may be a tangible, rational thing that you are conflicted over, which, by the way, in 70% of the time, what you think you're conflicted about is not what they think you're conflicted about. So that's also really interesting, right? When you often I say to people, write down everything on a flip chart or a paper or something that you and I think we are conflicted about. Like it could be with your husband or wife, right? Say, we're clearly really irritated with each other. Is this really about my mother-in-law, right? Or is it something else? You're all laughing, but it's true, right? And my husband comes from Sri Lanka, so I know a thing or two about Asia and mother-in-laws. But write down all the things that you think you are conflicted about. And actually what it will show you is probably they're not the same thing. So it would be to find a way to get to that middle and understand what the problem really is, and then how you communicate through that. So trust is formed through listening. The last thing, gosh, I have so many things I could tell you guys, but the FBI has a model called the behavioral change stairway. I can't teach it right now, but Google it or message me and I'll send it to you. And what the behavioral change stairway shows us is that you cannot create any form of sustained behavioral change, i.e. overcoming a conflict, if you don't start first with listening. So in the stairway, it says step 1, listening. Step 2, empathy. Okay, I understand what you're saying, right? I understand where the challenge is. Step 3 is trust. From 3, you go to 4, which is influence, and 5 is behavioral change. So in the absence of power, and there are 6 power structures in the world, in the absence of power or risk, the only way to create sustained relationship shift is through listening and empathy. So hopefully that gave some food for thought.
Wow. Thank you, really, Mimi. I mean, I have absolutely no words to thank you for all that you have taken us through. And the last one was, I think, cherry on the cake, when you gave us literally activities that we can do in our organizations, be it a small team of 2-3 people or a 13,000 employee organization. simple things like asking about conflict, give positive words about conflict, or writing down saying what's happening. Brilliant. And I trust me, I can go on. I'm sure the audience can go on with you. But time again is a paucity, and Mimi, we really look forward to getting you back. But let me close this whole webinar with Mimi. Leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge.
Simon Sinek.
Absolutely.
Best quote ever. I love it.
You nailed it for us today. So, and I like what you continuously reiterated. Empathy is not a soft skill. It's the foundation of a strong leadership, I think high performing teams, and also a thriving workplace, not just a surviving, but a thriving workplace. And I think it's truly about seeing, listening, and understanding those around us. And today's conversation with you, Mimi, reminded us that empathy ain't anymore about being just nice, but it's about taking meaningful action to create an environment, starting from your home, from your dining conversations to the boardroom conversations. Everyone wants to be valued, feel valued and heard. So huge thanks to you, Mimi, for sharing your wisdom, insights, and what a generous person that you are, that you've given us even the ebooks and behavioral and giving us the real world experiences of how we can actually cultivate empathy at workplace. And your personal stories indeed made a difference to us. So everyone here today, let's not stop this conversation just with this webinar. We would love to show your love and shower your feedback on LinkedIn. Do write to Mimi and I, and we will really love to know how this went for you. And let's take this as a commitment to do one thing differently today. Mimi has given us so many things, but let's stick to one and commit ourselves to doing it. And making this place definitely a place not just to survive, but to thrive. Thank you so much for joining in today. And thank you, team, my team, for putting up this brilliant show for us here, Mimi. And you, I don't know really how to thank you, but I can give you a virtual hug and looking forward to hosting you. And Mimi also conducts a lot of programs in the corporate. So you're most, you can just connect with her on LinkedIn to call her to your organizations, and she can do virtual classes like this or face-to-face. And she loves India and the countries here. So we are very happy to take Mimi along with us for the programs as well. Thank you once again and have a lovely evening, ladies and gents. Bye-bye.
Night. Bye-bye.